Awesome. So this morning we'd like to welcome Chris Sacca here to the University of Nevada. Thank you very much for coming down from the mountain today. We understand it's also your anniversary today, if the Twitter universe is correct.
It is my anniversary,
so,
yeah.
Thank you very much for
taking
time.
Yeah.
Did you?
We got married at Squaw 4 years ago, yeah.
That's awesome. So you've got a little bit about the program. You got some bios from each of these folks. Many of them have watched numerous of your talks online, and so sort of the purpose of coming here today, at least from our perspective, is to sort of hear your thoughts on business innovation and entrepreneurship. But we don't want to rehash the stuff that you already have online, so we want to try to keep this focus on those lessons about innovation and entrepreneurship, in particular as they might relate to the African continent.
Wow, that's amazing. Reno's an amazing place, and that it's representing all of America to you is something I bet a lot of people on Periscope are like, that's interesting. So it's been a good time so far? Yeah, right on. I'm happy to hear that. So, well, it was a pleasure for me to come down. I know of this program. I worked on the Obama campaign, and I think to have a president who's finally recognizing all the potential in Africa has been fantastic, and to see the Young African Leaders Initiative is really cool. I had no idea you guys were in Reno, and so when they reached out, I was like, of course, I'd love to come down. That's really fun. I think it's particularly special to spend time with you. I want to do Q&A, but I also just want to say up front, as we were walking in here, I said, it's amazing how many of the people I work with in technology now, computer science programs are so intense that people don't get a chance to study abroad as much. They don't get to travel abroad. And so most people I work with haven't been to Africa. They haven't been to sub-Saharan Africa. I work with so many people who don't even realize that there's a mobile money economy there that is far advanced beyond what we have in the United States. So I've got companies now that work on top of that, like InVenture, that are doing incredibly well. But it's amazing how much naivety there is in this country about how powerful the economies are, how wonderfully robust the startup communities are, and the opportunity there. And so for me, I'm not doing this as a favor. I think it's a particularly cool chance for me to come here and hear from you guys as well. I think you're an amazing marketplace. I think there's fascinating talent and spirit and drive. And when I think about the obstacles that so many of you overcome to build companies, it's funny to frame that against how entitled and how easy a lot of entrepreneurs in this country have it these days. And so I'm interested to hear your stories, et cetera. But let's dive in. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Well, I actually have several questions along those lines, but maybe we can delay them and see how we go. So obviously you're intrigued by this group, and it's great that you're here to share your time with us. But maybe for the purposes of these folks, we've watched a lot of stuff online, but if you had to cut things down to their essence, what should we most know about what you value and who you are?
Like as a business person, or just who I am specifically?
Well, so both, actually. I think
Okay.
there's two things. I think we want to get to know you as a person, but we also want to get to know your business value. And one of the things that basically has been asked of every guest who's come here is, what are you most proud of, both as a person and as a business person? So kind of in that light.
Yeah. Okay, there's a lot. Well, that's like a book, right? That's like
yeah, several YouTube videos, several discussions.
Going back to my childhood, there's a lot of different ways to come across that. But I'll talk about how we have a few rules in my business. My partner Matt and I, when we invest in companies, I'm a venture capitalist. We invest in companies, and so we have a few rules. Number one at the top of that list is be proud of the deals we do. So we try to only invest in companies that I would be very proud to tell my daughters that's how we made money. I don't want to be, I don't want to ever have to equivocate or be ashamed of any of the reasons, why we got rich. And I think that's right at the top of our business life, and where business is just inseparable from personal life. I think there are a lot of people who have made money exploiting others, and I don't know how they sleep well at night, or I don't know how they look their kids in the eye and say like, hey, this is why we have all these fancy things, is because I figured out how to take advantage of poor people. And so I think that's right at the top for us, is just be proud of what we do, because to try and extract your business life from your personal life, I think is an impossibility. I think there are other principles that have served me well in business life as well as personal life. We have a strict, sorry to swear, but no asshole policy in terms of who we hire.
Can I take them out real quick?
Yeah.
So we know that you're not really here to look for investments in Africa, but we thought maybe we'd take a page from the swear jar thing.
Oh, okay.
I have a $500 billion note.
Oh, you got some of those. I've only ever seen those online.
You're gonna have this.
Oh my God, that is a $5 billion. I've never held one of these. That's amazing. Thank you. Thanks, man. These are legendary on the internet. I feel really lucky, actually. Thank you. But we have a no a-hole rule. And that means in terms of the people that we hire as well as the people that we work with. I think life is too short to work with jerks. And it's true. You take that home with you, right? So you might be in the middle of a good deal, a good opportunity, but you wear that anxiety and that frustration on you. You take it out on your friends and family. It's just with you, and life is just way too short for that. I try to work, and so many of these lessons when you ask about me involve work, because work is so much of a part of who I do, of who I am and what I do, and so there aren't very clear lines between those things. I don't have a formal office, so when we moved to the mountains up in Truckee, we just started inviting the entrepreneurs we work with to come stay with us at our house, because that's where I work. Later, that got to be where it was kind of stinky because we always had a house full of 25-year-old coders and stuff. So we bought the house next door, and they come through there, Camp Lowercase we call it, yeah. But for me, I really want to only work with people who have lived, traveled, or studied abroad extensively. I think it's too easy for someone growing up in the United States to live in a very comfortable bubble all the time. When you can read every street sign and you can use Google Maps to get directions, et cetera, it means you never have to actually ask anyone for help. And so you can get through your whole life never actually having to rely upon anybody else. But when you pop out of the subway in Tokyo and you're like, I have no idea what any of these signs say, and I can't understand what the people around me are saying, and I'm lost, and I'm late, and I'm tired, and I'm jet lagged, and you need to walk up and depend upon the kindness of a complete stranger. I think that teaches a certain humility. Sure. and a willingness to ask for help. In parallel with that, I think when we spend time in other cultures, it really helps develop our empathy. Sure. I think we start to develop this skill to be able to stand in somebody else's shoes and see how they see the world, what they're afraid of, what they celebrate, what their values are. And I think that leads to not just a better life experience, but better product building. So many products in technology are built by wealthy white kids who are products of great universities who've never really had physical challenges, and so they or economic challenges, and so they build products for themselves that don't necessarily take into account what the rest of the world would love to see, right? So we build phones with all these features that don't actually work without a really robust 4G connection or something. We build stuff in a bubble without understanding how the rest of the world works. And I just think the people that I have found most valuable and interesting and rewarding in my life are people who have been into all these other populations and have spent some time and they have that hallmark of humility, because they come back, and when we have what we call a bad day at work, it doesn't compare to a bad day where you're from. It doesn't compare to a bad day of a woman, a bad day of a woman in Tigray in Ethiopia who's walking 4 hours each way to get water, and maybe attacked by a lion, right? Like we don't take our lives as for granted, I think. And I think with that kind of humility, I think it's just much easier to cooperate. And so these are things that I think are personal values, but that certainly are work values as well. And all of this goes to one of the core skills that I think is underrepresented in our business these days is storytelling. I think that as we've gotten into this world of specialization, and our education system couldn't be more highly attuned to crank out incredible computer scientists and engineers, I think we have lost some of the real treasure that comes from studying the liberal arts and humanities, and from reading the great works and literally studying about death and dying and about healing and about other religions beyond what our own faith might be, and to be thinking about music and art and how all of these things influence ourselves as well as that build the perspectives of the people that we're working with or we're living with. And all of that goes to the art of storytelling. I think one of the things that's broken so often is without that empathy, we can't imagine what the audience wants to hear. And so we don't have, we're not actually providing value to them, or we're speaking to deaf ears because we're missing what's important and what's valuable to those people. And so I think the kind of perspectives that you, from your backgrounds, bring, I can imagine each of you has one foot in a world of incredible poverty, struggle, just some of the most fundamental questions of life. One foot in an entrepreneurial system that, we're in one of the most exciting economies in the world, where the new titans of business are emerging and there are so many entrepreneurial opportunities for you, and it's like the Wild West. Maybe a foot dabbling in government, some of which are kind of relatively young governments, new governments. You're having to deal at a really young age with corruption already and stuff like that. You've got a foot in world affairs. So you've got 4 feet, by the way. So yeah,
wild animals.
Yeah. You're dabbling in world affairs because you can't avoid it. You're in the middle of world affairs. They deeply affect you. Somebody living here doesn't necessarily have to think about that as much, but you're in the middle of this global context, and so you have all of these very unique perspectives that I think many people here don't have. And I think they make you much more valuable and effective storytellers. So as you're building a solution to a problem, I think you're able to identify problems that many people might not see. And I think you're going to be able to build a solution that impacts not just the fortunate ones who've been able to go to university, et cetera, but people well beyond that. And you're going to be able to communicate that effectively to all these different audiences. I have to speak effectively to startup entrepreneurs. I also have to speak to fancy people on Wall Street who give me the money to invest in startup entrepreneurs. And so I have to speak those 2 different languages. And then I have to know the language of the users of the stuff too. And I have to make good guesses about, would normal people care about that product? What does it solve a problem for somebody that's not me? Is that I've been fortunate enough in my life that I don't really pay that much attention to prices for stuff. But I know for a lot of people, there's a very big difference between a free app and a $1.99 app, right? And so I have to be able to put myself in the shoes of the other person there and channel that. One incredible example of this from our portfolio is this company, InVenture. I don't know if you've heard of it yet. The entrepreneur's name is Shivani Saroya. So Shivani was born in India but was raised by Indian parents in the United States. And her parents are this perfect contrast. Her dad is a incredibly successful investment banker on Wall Street, and her mom is a public health doctor working on just health for the masses, right? And she kind of grew up in both of these worlds, ruthless capitalist and incredibly, socialist, looking out for universal health care. So she spent time in an investment bank. She went to Columbia and is an econometrist, a brilliant mathematician, statistician. She worked in an investment bank and understands deeply the nature of deals, and she worked in mergers and acquisitions. And then she left there to work for the United Nations, and she spent 2.5 years in 9 countries, and in each country she interviewed 750 small business people and their families. And so this is across Africa and Southeast Asia, where she would go and see how these people who maybe had a stall or a kiosk that they were selling from, or they were a seamstress, or they sold textbooks, et cetera, like how they managed their money, like how they accounted for their money, how they would borrow money, how they would take money out of the till to spend on their family, how they thought about investing in a second sewing machine so they could grow their business. And so she did this for 2.5 years and learned more about those economies than I think any person on the planet, and she was in her 20s. Then went back to work for an investment bank, was like, this is brutal. I hate this. So at night, she started building an app. And I remember I asked her, like, so who coded this for you? When she saw it, when she made the demo, she's like, oh, I did. And I was like, but wait, I looked at your resume. You're not a coder. And she's like, come on, it's not that hard. I taught myself. And so at night, she would teach herself to code. And finally, her bosses at the investment bank were like, we think you have another job, don't you? She's like, yeah, I really want to start this thing. So they're like, go start it. We'd love to see you follow your passion. So InVenture has in Kenya, it's called, Kenya and Tanzania, it's called Mkopo Rahisi. And so, you know what? Yeah, cool. And so you basically download this app to your Android phone, and It instantly tells you if you're credit worthy, and it makes you a mobile money loan. And these loans, go for, sometimes it's personal expenses. Somebody died, I need bus fare to get to a funeral. Other times, like, I need to buy my textbooks. Other times it's, I need that second sewing machine and I can double the size of my business. And, she charges an interest rate that's about 75% less than what you'd pay if you were going through an informal money lender. Her repayment rate is higher than any, than what we call FICO, like the mortgage lender. So the credit ratings that we have in the United States actually have a lower repayment rate than the loans she's giving to people in Kenya and Tanzania with no permanent address, no prior credit history, and she's getting repaid back at a higher rate. It's fascinating. But there is no, and by the way, this will be one of the most successful businesses we've ever invested in. There is absolutely no way that business could have been built by somebody who was just sitting here all day and not traveling the world, not being exposed to all these different cultures, not understanding the financing challenge of a small business person or a family in one of these economies, not deeply understanding mobile money. As I mentioned, a lot of people don't even realize that you guys have these mobile money platforms. And so it's that, I actually feel like it's that kind of advantage that you're going to have as entrepreneurs, to have those perspectives, those very unique perspectives, to build for audiences that are ignored and yet have, so much spending power, who are growing their businesses so rapidly, who, you have this huge emerging tens of millions of people coming into the middle class for the first time as a result of technology. And yet a lot of the developed world, the investment folks, are blind to that. I'll give you a uniquely American example. We have a founder named Melody McCloskey. So Melody is a white woman who started a company called Style Seat. And I mentioned she's white for a reason. So it's a company that provides, if you're a stylist, if you're a hairstylist or you do nails, you can come onto this site and you can build a profile for yourself and talk about the services you offer, have a portfolio of your work, show your prices, and then people can book with you. And you can run your business there, you can have a calendar, you can take payment through it. It's a wonderful service. But when she first went and pitched it to venture capitalists, most of whom are white men, they were like, I don't get it, right? And even when she pitched it to me, I'm like, I know Melody, I know she's a great entrepreneur, I'll put in some money. And so I came home and told my wife, and I was like, I don't know if it's gonna be a big deal, but we like Melody, I'd put in some money. And she's like, let me ask you a question. How much do you think women spend to get their hair cut in San Francisco? And I was like, I don't know, I paid $19, so maybe like 40? And she started laughing. It's like, no, it's like $200 to get your hair cut in this city. I was like, really? And then she said, let me ask you another question. Which of our blonde friends do you think is actually blonde? And I started listing off these friends. She's like, no way, that's like $500 every 3 months to be that blonde. And I was like, no way, this is a huge business. And I was totally blind to it because I lived in my own little world, right? So I went back to Melody and I was like, Melody, I want to put in more money. I want to teach me about this business. It's huge. And we started learning all about this industry. And again, I say white woman because one of the things that was interesting is that half of her business is black stylists doing black hair, which is a massive industry that my world was completely blind to, right? So braids and weaves and are just really, they're expensive. They're really important in that culture. And we were completely naive to it. And then even I learned, black men tend to get their hair cut much more frequently than a white guy. My hair can get all shaggy, it doesn't really matter, but you got to keep yours tight, right? And so this was another perspective that I was completely blind to. And it was funny, as she pitched investors, most of whom are white men, they were like, I don't get it, I'm not really into that. And so we kept buying up more of the company because nobody else would. Now it's a $100 million company and she's incredibly successful and she's empowered a whole generation of mostly women stylists who now own their own business. Instead of being dependent upon a salon, they now are in charge of their own business and booking their own stuff. But that was completely predicated on an atypical entrepreneur who had a view to audiences that most of us didn't. And as a result, she's built an incredible business. And so that's one of the things we're always looking for, are these businesses that don't necessarily serve the bubble. But we call, by the way, we call all these states in between California and New York the flyover states, So, because you're just flying over them. But that's real America, right? So Melody's company, Style Seed, is incredibly successful in Chicago, Houston, Atlanta, like all across these places where there are so many real Americans that are outside of our tech bubble, outside of our San Francisco lens on the world. And so that's what I think is a distinct advantage of this room, is a lens you have on solutions that many of us might not even know there's a problem there in the first place. You identify a problem for a group of people who are being ignored, and then you have a unique perspective on how to solve it. And then you have the storytelling capability to both really bring in, think about the storytelling necessary to build an Uber, right? So Uber is this perfect marketplace between riders, the people riding the cars who are like, I can't find a cab, it's unsafe. Like, as a woman, I feel totally unsafe in a car, or something like that at night. And then on the other side, you've got these drivers who are like, I spend most of my day sitting around waiting. I work for a guy who owns the car, who takes 75% of my pay home every day. Like, this sucks. I'd love to control my own destiny. And so to build that business required founders like Travis and Garrett who could speak to both of those audiences, who knew them well. And Ryan, who is our other co-founder, Ryan Graves, like, he had this ability to like walk into a garage of seemingly hostile limo drivers and walk out arm in arm with friends. He just knew like what matters to a driver, right? A driver, and there are things, they don't just want to make more money, but real drivers want to be treated like professionals. You get into the back of a cab and it's so anonymous that they're bad to you, you're bad to them, because in 10 minutes your relationship is going to be over, and so you're just nasty to each other, right? But you get into an Uber where they know your name and you know their name and you're both going to be rated. Funny how everyone ends up being really nice to each other. Like, just humans start acting nice, and then the driver is like, look, I'm actually a skilled driver. I do this professionally. I want to be treated like a professional. You know that in so many other occupations and yet it's forgotten sometimes by people who haven't had that job, who haven't, a driver isn't just, a robot necessarily. They're a professional. They feel like they bring some style to it, some knowledge of the city, and they want to feel like they're in a system that treats them that way. And that was one of the magic, that's the magic Uber, and that's why it's a $50 billion company today. So anyway.
So yeah, you touched on many, many areas that I want to circle back to.
Well, I got to get my $5 billion worth, so,
Well, we'll make more. One of the things I guess I want, bringing it back to sort of the African perspective here is, we definitely live in a global economy. And I agree 100%. I talk to my students all the time about the importance of working and traveling and studying abroad. But curious to know, are you more inclined to partner, collaborate, do business with American who has studied and worked and lived abroad, or perhaps somebody from a developing country who has come to the United States and done some work here? And so maybe juxtapose those two positions and then maybe talk about what your single greatest expectation would be in terms of partnering with that kind of environment.
Well, I think if you look around our portfolio, there are some really cool stats out there that I can't quote off the top of my head, but how many of the most successful companies in Silicon Valley were started by foreign founders, yes, right? By immigrants or children of immigrants. It's way out of, it's way disproportionate to what that population looks like across the United States, for instance. And so it goes right to what I'm talking about, this incredible perspective, this hustle, this, you show up here with a few dollars in your pocket, or your parents do, and you need to make stuff happen. You're a person who gets stuff done. And so if you look, even just when I worked at Google, we had people who, at the end of the day, when you'd sit down for dinner, they'd tell you about the village they came from in India, and like how they got into the IITs, which is the top of their university system there, which is nearly impossible to get into. But everything they did to study and to pass those tests and then to get there, and everything their parents had to do to even pay for them to get there. And you hear stories of entrepreneurs coming out of China. By the way, I actually shared an office once with a kid who looked Indian, and he had an Indian name, but he actually was, he grew up in Botswana, and he didn't grow up rich in Botswana. He grew up just African in Botswana. It was kind of wild. And I remember I just assumed he was Indian. We shared it. We had at Google, everyone sat, 4 people in an office one time. And then I mentioned something about Swaziland. And he's like, oh yeah, when I was a kid. I was like, you went to Swaziland as a kid? He's like, dude, I grew up right near there. And like, it was just surreal. I was like, wait, you're you're an Indian African. This is, but that guy had unique perspectives on the world, right? And really valuable. My wife actually, her parents are both in the foreign service, so she grew up in Mauritania, Gambia, and Swaziland, and she's half Chinese, and so she lived in Swaziland during apartheid still, and her parents couldn't rent, a regular rental car because she was mixed race, and they couldn't stay in the regular hotels, so she stayed in the colored hotels and rented from the colored, car rental places and stuff like that, which is surreal to think about for me, like an American girl, from an American family who actually experienced apartheid is a really interesting perspective. But I think, and by the way, she's been one of the most successful advertising creatives of her generation, I think, because so many of her international perspectives